Welcome to the Elevating La Cultura podcast, a space where I talk with Latinas who are passionate about what they do and are willing to share that passion with others to change the narrative, especially for the next generation. Each season is centered around different topics, but all with a Latina perspective. Welcome to Season 8, where we will talk all things corporate and higher education. I'm so excited to share these powerful stories. So vámonos, and let's get into it. Okay, we are kicking off the season with our first guest, Beatriz Rivera, a former social worker turned entrepreneur coach from South Central Los Angeles. As an entrepreneur and business coach, she helps her clients progress in their entrepreneur journey like a boss. She uses coaching, mentorship, and accountability to help her clients reach their entrepreneur and small business goals. So let's get into this episode. Hello, I am so excited to be getting right into this season, and I'm excited to talk to Beatriz. We connected maybe like a month or two ago, and I had the honor of being on her podcast, and so I'm so excited to turn the mic around and have her on this podcast to share her story. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Karina. Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be on this podcast. It is my first, well, I guess I would say my second podcast guest experience. So the first one I was on my friends but they're my friends. So, but this feels like, thank you so much for this opportunity. Yeah, my name is Beatriz, or Bea. I am an entrepreneur and business coach, and I am the founder of Beabosscoaching, where I provide one-on-one coaching for women of color, BIPOC, and queer entrepreneurs.
As we talked after recording your podcast, I was super interested in the fact that you did have a corporate job and you did go through higher education and the reasons why you decided to transition out. And so that is why I thought that your story would be an amazing one to have on the podcast this season, especially as we talk with fellow corporate baddies. And I'd love to hear more about that story. Like, what brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually used to work for Mount Sinai Hospital. It's a large healthcare system in New York City, one of the largest. I'm talking as if I'm still there, but they had, I believe, about eight hospitals throughout New York City with 50,000 employees. So it was a really large healthcare system and network to work with. And I was there before I was the administrative manager, which was my role within my care management department. I was a social worker, so I come from a social work background, and I did case management within our care management field, providing care coordination and connecting patients to resources and helping them navigate the healthcare system. And I was doing that for about 3 years until I got promoted to administrative manager. And I think, just thinking back around that time, I actually didn't feel, or I didn't know that I was going to be in that role or in that position. I actually, when I decided to go to School of Social Work, I wanted to do more macro work. I wanted to do policy or do nonprofit work and work that impacts a larger scale. And my focus when I was in grad school actually was social enterprise administration. So that was the path or the role that taught you about program management and program evaluation and nonprofits and boards. And I wanted to do that because I thought before going to school, before going to grad school, that I want to be in a big fancy office and I want to be in a big fancy building and have a nice title. And, I thought about that, and I didn't know that sort of there was like this corporate path to that, right? I didn't know actually that it was a corporate type of path that appealed to me. I just sort of wanted that status. And Columbia University, it's a big name. It's an Ivy League name, and so I really took the opportunity to go there, and I had no regard for not even how much it was going to cost me. And I decided to go there, and I decided to do that specific path because within social work, the most traditional path is actually clinical. It's a very clinical path. A lot of folks go into private practice. And I knew that's not what I wanted. That's not the path I wanted to go. And I decided that I would do this instead. And while I was in grad school, because it's social work, you get to learn just the different my eyes were opened up to so many things that I didn't know or learn about until I got to grad school. And I I think because I was learning so much, I didn't really think about what was next. I didn't think about where would I go next. I think I was learning so much and I was focused on school and trying to finish. And obviously, like you invest so much money in school, you're you want to finish, you want to make sure that you get that done. And I actually out of grad school was trying to live out in New York City by myself, and I was trying to figure out what to do, and I was trying to find a job, and the first job that came before, no longer couch surfing, because I literally was couch surfing after grad school and moving out of my grad school apartment. I took the first job that came to me, which was actually a tenant support specialist working for the New York City's mayor's office. And I really actually enjoyed that job because it was a very community organizing type of job. I would go out and talk to people out on the streets and talk to them about their rights and their tenant rights. But because it was a brand new initiative and a brand new program, there was a lot of folks in that program that were really more there for climbing the political ladder and sphere. And so the environment just didn't, it no longer helped me to see that I could grow there. And I took the first job that came my way out of that. And my first opportunity was Mount Sinai. So I actually had my roommate at the time I was telling her about everything that was going on. And she said, we have positions open. And because I honestly, like I said, I didn't think about doing the clinical route. That's not the route that I wanted to do. I was a little hesitant, but I also more wanted to leave the position where I was and just take anything that came my way. And actually, so I took that and I realized, well, I mean, I'm a social worker. I have my social work degree. And I actually did clinical, and I did clinical in healthcare. And I did that, and I actually really loved it. And I loved it because the work itself is so close to working with people and working with patients. And I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit. I got really good. I loved working with my patients. I loved coaching through them, through their things and their struggles and their goals. And then I think at one point I realized that I was no longer challenged. I was, I got really good at my job and I loved it. And the administrative work that came with it was something I could manage, but I think I needed a challenge. And I think that's what I'm realizing now is I need to feel challenged. And the next thing for me, the opportunity that popped up was applying for this administrative manager role, and that's how I ended up in that role. Is I applied, and they were really impressed by my background in social administration and also as a case manager. So I both had clinical experience, and I also had training in administrative work. And so I was able to get the job, and it was the first time that I was in middle management, formally having a team of my own and managing a team of my own, but not just managing my team, but also managing and wanting to perform for my superiors. So it was the first time that I was in that position, and that's how I got there.
Let's celebrate that, because I resonate with what you said in the beginning when you are like, well, I just wanted that good job so
Yeah.
that I can live in the city and stand and look out into the skyline. And I think that is something that we are um, fed at
Mm-hmm.
such a young age, especially with movies. Like
Yeah.
the movies open up and you see the skyline, and then you see
Yeah.
the person in the pencil dress and the high heels, and
Yeah.
they're in their corporate office
Mm-hmm.
and they seem to be living the life, and you're
Yeah.
like, I want that.
Yeah.
And I mean, as a daughter of an immigrant, like my father really wanted that for me. Like he was like, I see you living downtown and you're in your
Mm-hmm.
office, and I want you to continue in higher education. And so we're fed these stories and these aspirations. And then once we're kind of in the system, like we're just riding the wave
Yeah.
and like seeing where it takes us. And so the fact that you like took it all the way to the end and did grad school and were able to get the positions that you got and have the self-awareness to say like, okay, this job doesn't suit me right
Mm-hmm.
now. Let me look for something else.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, okay, well, this job, I love it, but I need to be challenged a little bit. So let me look for something else. Like, I think, having that self-awareness to continue
Mm-hmm.
is also impressive.
Mm.
But I want to know, like, where did all of this start for you? Like when you were a little girl, like what were your goals and aspirations, and what inspired you to continue all the way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I like you, I also come from parents who are immigrants. I'm a child of immigrants. My parents came here in the 80s from El Salvador. And my dad came here in the early 80s, my dad in the late 80s, and they actually met here in Los Angeles. And, in 89, that's when I was born. And since then, they're assimilating to a new country. They're trying to figure out their new language. And you see them wanting to assimilate to the culture, wanting to make this a home growing up. And my dad, I was very fortunate to have parents who are very loving and want the best for you. And my dad, especially my dad, I'm very close to my dad. And so he's like my rock. I get very emotional when I think about my dad, or if anything in the future, I hate thinking about, that, one day he won't be with me. I hate that. But I grew up him telling me, I want you to use your brain to work. I don't want you to use your body and do physical labor. Like I want you to use your brain to get to where you want to be. And that was sort of the message that he kept telling me when I was growing up, is like, you need to go to school, you need to get good grades. I and it's funny, I have a little funny story, because when I was in third grade, I actually was really bad in school when I was like in kinder, first and second grade. And I didn't have the self-awareness to know that it was because I couldn't see. I literally couldn't see. And it was until third grade that my teacher noticed something and had told my mom, I think she needs glasses. And it was in third grade that I got my first pair of glasses, and my world literally opened up. And since then, I was, I have been addicted to books and to learning and to reading. I just became the biggest nerd because I could see, I could finally understand what was going on. and and so ever since then, and then on top of my dad telling me, you know, you need to get good grades, and he was also the person that taught me how to read. So, you know, I have a big love for reading. and and so I grew up thinking, okay, well, I'm going to get good grades, I'm going to go to college, and I'm going to go, you know, go as far as I could. I think I even thought about, oh, I'm going to get my PhD, like, you know, I'm going to be a doctor of some sort. I didn't need to be a medical doctor, but I was like, I'm going to get my PhD, you know, and you learn what that means when you're like in eighth grade or whatever. You're like, yeah, I'll get a PhD. And, and so that was the upbringing that I had with my parents, and my especially my dad always encouraging me. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to make both of you proud, so I'm going to go to school. But I think there was always just a feeling where I felt like this is what I'm expected to do, but there was like a little tiny feeling where like there was other things I wanted to explore, but I just didn't, right? Because I wanted to make my parents proud. And so I did, and I ended up going to grad school, and I went to college, and like you said, I was just riding the wave, trying to see where it took me. I did psychology. I actually majored in psychology and child development in in college because I thought, well, maybe I could be a child psychologist. And that was because, you know, I was parentified as a child, and also I experienced trauma as a child. So I knew that there was needed a healing that I needed to do, that I knew what happened. I think I was just still too young to figure out what that looked like for me. And but I thought maybe this is the path I could help other children heal, you know? And but it was just, I was having these thoughts, but I'm also trying to finish school. And like, you know, I'm a very emotional person, so I'm like thinking about how am I feeling right now, and how am I getting through to the next thing in my life. And that's sort of, I'm realizing now, I think that there's this survivor mode even within me where it's like, what if once I'm finished with this, what is next? I need to make sure that there's something that's next. And so I think that's the question that's always been fueled for me, that's been fueling me from when I was younger to college to grad school, is what is next. And now I realize I would add what's next, but with what do I love and how do I want to do it? Because that the question that I solely helps me operate from, the only question that I thought about was what is next. And now, yes, that question, and what do I love? And I think that's been helping me to kind of think more intentionally about the things that I do and how I choose to the decisions that I make and where I want to go next professionally, um, and also personally as well.
What was your feeling once you graduated each time? Like grad school is a big deal, and sometimes we don't take time to celebrate all of the accomplishments until we look back and say like, oh, I did that. And years have gone by and you haven't taken the time to celebrate. And then you're like, man, I wish I would have spent more time appreciating all the hard work that I went through. So, what did you and your family do, if anything, to celebrate um, that accomplishment?
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because when I think back to even just graduating high school and college, I think when I graduated high school, I that was, if I can recall, was really the only time that I actually took to celebrate. I think it was because, wow, and now I'm going to college. This is what we've been expecting and experiencing and wanting for me. And we celebrated and it was a great time. And I think when I think back to what that was like for college, again, I was so focused or worried about what's next that the celebration didn't feel as pronounced from the first time. And I think it was, and it's crazy, it's really wild because I those were really hard years. Like those 4 years that I did in college were really hard, and there was a lot going on. And on top of that, I was a commuter, so I didn't live in the dorms. I would drive to I went to Mount St. Mary's College, and it's a local college. They have two campuses, one in here in downtown and one in Brentwood. And because I lived closer to downtown, I would drive to downtown, park my car, and take the shuttle up to our Brentwood campus. And it was, there was a lot of movement there. I was always trying, I would have to get up early and like take early classes. And I had to take summer classes to finish in time. And it was just the whole time I was trying to keep up. I was trying to make sure that I graduated on time. Like this is, I can't, it felt like a deadline. And it's crazy because, you can take as much time as you need to finish college. There are folks who finish college in more than 4 years, and it's totally okay. And I think that there was this pressure. Like I think when we're younger, there's this pressure to like need to finish in the allotted time or the traditional time and by this age. And I think I was trying to do that. And and I think when I did do it, it felt good. And it was also like, it was more of a relief rather than celebrate. And actually, after college, because I was so focused on just trying to like make this mark, like almost this life marker, I was trying to like, even though it's like there's no rule, right, that says I had to graduate, that's when I need to graduate, but there's like this it's almost unwritten where after college you're supposed to finish in 4 years, and you're supposed to be this age. And so it's, I was so focused on trying to make that happen that I didn't think ahead to what was next after that. And so when that moment came, when I was when I was graduating college, I remember one day, I just woke up in the morning in a sweat, just so anxious and so worried about the fact that I was going to graduate in less than 2 months, and I had no plan for what was next. I didn't know what job I was going to have. Was I gonna keep going to school? What program was I going to apply for? I had no idea, and I was so panicked that it hit me just one day. I was just like so focused on trying to finish that it hit me one day that I just don't know what would happen after graduation. And I got so panicked that I was like, okay, let me think about what's next. And by that point, it was too late to apply anywhere, to go to grad school anywhere. So I don't know what it was. I think I had like an internal dialogue with myself, and I told myself that it was okay, that I could take some time off and I could figure it out in the next year or so, or 2 years. And so that's what happened. I got a job out of college, and I was so proud of myself. I think I was proud that I made that marker, that I made it, and now I have a job. So it's not like I'm just unemployed, out of college. I had a job, and so I got my first office job in this disability firm. And I think it was because I was so focused again on just figuring out what to do next, that I saw this job fair. I told myself I would go, and I went, and I met a recruiter who was recruiting for this disability law firm. And when I started that job, that's when I realized, oh my God, I'm an adult. I graduated. I have an office job. I have a cubicle. And that that was really fun for me. I really loved it. I loved my supervisor, and I loved my coworkers, and most of the folks there were people out of college. So we were all sort of trying to navigate our first jobs. And so I actually did that for about 2 years. I was a case manager, and it was my first time ever being in an office, having benefits, having health care. And I thought, wow, like, I love this. I have health care. I have a paycheck. I have retirement benefits. And on top of that, I lived with my parents. So, like, I was saving money, and my parents were, I was helping them out. And so it was great. And I think finally the time came for me to apply again to school, because I was still like, okay, well, now I need to go to school. I still had that mentality of, I need to go and to school and be this scholar, right? And so that's when I applied to social work school, because I enjoyed the helping profession, and I also enjoyed just the versatility that social work provided. You could be a social worker at a school, in a hospital. You could work for social work in HR in big corporations. And so there was just so many different things that you could do with that degree, that I decided to pursue that. And I that's the route that I took. And that's how I got to grad school 2 years after college, and working for a law firm. Yeah.
I think a lot of times once we graduate college, after so many years of going to school, it
Yeah.
feels strange to
Yeah.
not go to school. Because I also, like, I graduated, I took a little bit of time off, and then I was like, I should go back to school, and
Yeah.
let me apply at my local college.
Yeah.
And it's we get conditioned to having that structure, and especially because we are conditioned to always be learning and take education as such a priority. Like, it
Mhm.
feels strange to not be in class learning something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I totally relate to that aspect of your story, and saying like, oh, let me continue learning, let me see what's next.
Yeah.
um, but throughout all of your education and all of the jobs, did you ever experience any biases or micro or macroaggressions? And how did you navigate those?
Yeah. Yeah. I I'm glad that you asked this question, because I like I said, I grew up in South Central LA, so it's a very black and brown, very Latino like community, and so going to school, growing up, I went to school with a lot of other black and brown kids and Latinos, and that was comfortable. And when I went to college, it was an all women's college where 80% of its students are also Latinas. So it was also very comfortable for me to go there. I wasn't the only woman of color in class. And so it wasn't until grad school where it was just the culture shock of everything, just on top of being in a brand new city, New York City, and then going to a predominantly white institution, that's when I learned what even the word microaggression even means. I never even learned that word before. But when I learned that word, I realized it flashed, like I had all these flashbacks to like an experience growing up. For example, my dad used to own a shop at La Brea Mall, which is a mall I think in Orange County, which is a very predominantly white county. And I remember I was around 12 years old. I would go to work with him. And because you're in the mall, like you're a teenage girl, you want to go see the mall. So I remember going into Claire's, and one, the lady didn't offer me, you know how sometimes they offer you a basket to shop around. One, she didn't offer me a basket. And two, she clearly saw me because she was following me. And I just felt so uncomfortable. And I was 12 years old, and I already felt some type of way about her not offering me a basket. And I was looking, and she kept looking at me so weird, and I wasn't sure why. So I left, and I remember going back to my dad and saying, "Dad, this happened. I don't know what." And he immediately was like, "Don't go back there." Like, just don't go in there. And obviously at that time, I didn't know what was happening, what was going on. But when I got to grad school and I'm learning about racial injustice and anti-racism and anti-oppression, it's when I felt validated about why I even felt homesick and weird being at Columbia. And there was a language put to my experience that now it wasn't just about emotion. Now I can articulate what this is. And I it wasn't until then that I went back and I realized all these times, and it wasn't a lot, again, because I grew up in South Central. So for the most part, I felt safe and comfortable growing up in the neighborhood that I did. But I started to think about, wow, the reason why do I feel so uncomfortable around white people? And it's because most of the interactions that I have growing up with white people they were teachers or police officers or people of authority. And I realized that in rooms where I was the only person of color, I would make myself smaller, and I would just not want to give my opinion. And in grad school, I was, I was a woman of color learning about this. So I was super hyper aware. I was both trying to use my voice and trying to take up space because I was so mad at just like everything that I was learning, and also trying to learning that at the same time. But also, it's not easy to unlearn just the ways that you behave in, a few months or like a few days. And so there was a lot of, for me, a lot of internal like tug and pull, because I was learning why I felt that way, but it's not like I could just turn it off or just unlearn it so quickly. And And so I think right after grad school is when I just having that lens, and especially as a social worker, I think during that time it was 2014. So it was a really big time for Black Lives Matter movement, right? It was when like the whole thing with Eric Garner was happening, and Michael Brown, like all of those moments were really significant during that time, and it really opened up the conversation even more around microaggressions and anti-racism. And and so it was just, not only was I learning it, then there was like a huge cultural moment around it. And on top of that, I was navigating just being there by myself in a brand new city. And so it was during that time that I looked for a community, and I was trying to have these conversations with people that were willing to have conversations, and especially in social work school, because as social workers, we a lot of folks think your job is to help people, right? And it is to help people, but we can't just be the saviors. We can't just like be people that come into communities and like try and save people. No, like we have to understand the invisible factors that are happening, and the the systems that are in place that historically are designed to marginalize people of color and communities of color. And so I I was learning all of that, and I was trying to figure out, okay, so who is willing to have these conversations, and who is okay with not being being uncomfortable sometimes, because these are very difficult things to talk about. And so I think during that time, I if I talked to somebody about an experience, or brought up conversations around the culture and our environment and how we perpetuate systems, like I sort of would read people, and if they were uncomfortable, like then I sort of would maybe go my own way, or we go our separate ways. But I think for me, the way that because I was learning it, and I was like, it was a lot going on for me, just learning it and also having these conversations and having my eyes open up to those experiences all at once. I was really trying to, the way I navigated it was trying to read people and trying to find people who are willing to have those conversations. And I did, and I was so grateful to just find that community and to have conversations with folks who were also angry and who were also trying to organize and then bring these conversations forward, um, into not just social work, but into their lives. And that's how I navigated it. It's just associating myself and surrounding myself with people that were willing to have these hard conversations, and calling things out as they were, and uh, having the courage to have these conversations, because um it's, like I said, it's not easy. And most folks, especially when that is not the culture, when anti-racism is not directly talked about, and like it's not something that we're committed to, because we talk about diversity and we talk about all different things, and when that is not intentional for us to talk about those things, I think it's a lot harder for people to really um, talk about when microaggressions are happening, and when they are, and nobody calls it out, it just becomes this culture where people are committing microaggressions against other people, and it's not, that's how toxicity, I think, is is born. It's just from not having those types of conversations. But that's how I would navigate it. It's just, and what's cool about social work, and I think being in a social work background within healthcare system, it's it's funny because even though we are in a corporate setting, it it's still a social work department where we understand that these values are important and that these are important conversations. So within my corporate work and being in middle management, all of us, especially my superiors and everybody, even up to our VP, they were social workers. So they understood that these conversations were important. I don't know how it would have been in, in like the financial department at healthcare system, like, or what the conversation would be like around there. But um I think that's what I appreciate about social work, is that now that is more intentionally being talked about.
Yeah, that's super encouraging. And I think that there's always this sense of overwhelm when our eyes are opened to all of the social and racial injustices that are out there. And it's so important to find that community. And I think as Latinas, we are that added extra layer of empathy and just wanting to find safety. Like you said, like you were just more aware of people's demeanor or comfortability or just like how they acted. Um, I think that is, like I said, an extra layer that we have to navigate. And it can be a lot. It can be overwhelming. And I love that you said that you were intentional about having those conversations and finding people that you could be in community with, and that the social justice is an important piece in social work. So I'm curious as to how you decided to transition out of your corporate job and into what you're doing now, because that's a huge change.
Yeah. I mean, the you know, it wasn't it's funny because when TikTok started coming out, and I don't know if you've seen videos on TikTok where people like make fun of like the corporate type of like settings, and or things that happen when you're in a corporate type of environment, and things, little things, as even just sending an email. You're like, oh my gosh, that's so me. I read back my emails for sure. I read it from my sent box because I want to read it from the other person's perspective. And it's so funny because like I when I was in a social worker, that didn't really happen. I was a social worker working with patients, and I dealt with my own administrative work. So I had a lot of autonomy in that role. And when I transitioned to my administrative manager job, I still had a lot of autonomy, but I also realized that there was a lot of expectations that I needed to, or performance that I don't know how to say it, but I needed to I felt this need to make sure that my superiors were happy. And and on top of that, I had my own team. I managed a small team of 3, and we were the administrative team for a 200 person department. And so there was a lot that was put on us during that time, especially during the pandemic, because when I transitioned into my administrative manager role, it had been the pandemic. I transitioned to that role in, I think it was November of 2019. And it was, a few months when the pandemic happened. And so I was still getting used to uh, being a leader and learning how to be a leader for a team and to supervise other people. And I was trying to get comfortable with that and trying to get comfortable with delegating and supervising folks, and also wanting to make sure I perform for my boss and my supervisor. And so it was, November, December, you have a lot of time off. People are, going to off on vacation, and then January. So I felt like I was in that role for 2 months, even though it had been longer, but I felt like I wasn't in the role that long before the pandemic hit. And then when the pandemic hit, it was just chaos, just so much chaos. And me being the administrative manager, I I had I did have my supervisor and a small team, that other managers who were part of trying to transition everybody from working in the hospital every day to now working at home and still trying to serve our patients. And just remembering that time was just so much chaos, a lot of scrambling around, trying to figure out how can we make this work. And I remember during that time just not sure if I would be able to pull this off, to like learn how to be in this role. And after the pandemic hit, a few months later, finally things calmed down a little bit. We were all still working from home. And that's when I had to learn how to adapt, and how to adapt to just quickly to so many changes. And I realized that it wasn't just the pandemic, it's just like the department and just corporate in general. There's just so many changes, so much movement on top, that you have to be ready to adapt to changes in the organization, and policies and pandemics. So I I realized like there was so much adaptability that I needed to learn and to like get used to. And that really helped me to learn and grow from that experience. And I remember being at my desk and writing emails, and I would be writing it to like my supervisor, and I would just try to write an email that sounded polite and like friendly, and also like I also need asking for something, right? Asking for whatever I need. And it would just take me an hour to write an email, and I even now I kind of still realize it still takes me an hour because I'm like trying to find the right words and the right tone and whatnot. But I realized there's so much more nuance when you're in settings and roles where you're dealing with executives and VPs. I was so much closer to my VP than I was before, and I was working, and so I really enjoyed just the what I learned around how to manage relationships, but I also just saw the way that like the closer you get to like the top management level, the more politics there are. And that while I appreciated learning from that experience, I didn't see myself wanting to like climb the ladder. I didn't see myself wanting the next higher role, which would be a director, or, you know, and then higher than that, like senior director. I just didn't see, and even if I did, I thought about it, and I told myself it would be a long time before I would get myself there, because everybody in those roles, like the higher you go, the less roles there are for that position. And so I didn't see myself taking so long to like get to roles where I could lead bigger teams or learn more. And then I saw it as also me being more exposed to the politics of the workplace. And while I'm sure there's so much to learn from those roles and positions and how to be a leader, I wanted to be a leader in my own right, in like me doing it my way and also creating my own anything. And that to me meant creating my own business. And I felt like I want to be a leader, but there's a lot of red tape and a lot of milestones that I would need to hit to get myself to those next challenges and to the next professional milestone. And I think I just wanted it to do it now. And like the pandemic was a big turning point. I think for a lot of us it was a big turning point, but I definitely, not only did it help me to see that I want more, but it also helped me to see that it's possible to do it differently than the corporate, the the professional career that I was in. I think it was a time where a lot of folks were seeing all the possibilities that are possible. And so I really wanted to be a leader, create something from scratch for myself, and then hopefully uh get money and get paid, doing that. And so I wanted to try it and give myself that chance and bet on myself. And I remember having that conversation. I was so scared to have that conversation with my supervisor and telling her, because I loved her. My supervisor was amazing and she was a great support. And it was hard to have a conversation around, so I'm thinking of starting my own business and quitting. um, so so she definitely was very supportive in that, and we prepare. I actually told her about 6 months before quitting. I told her, I this is what I'm thinking, and I want you to know with enough time so that that this is coming. And so we prepared at work just to make sure that we transfer everything, and like the right person, the next person taking over, would have the information and the training to do the job well. And so I think that's sort of how I got myself here. It's just I, I didn't see myself no longer on that path. I wanted to just create my own, and it's been a roller coaster. It's been up and down, but it's definitely, I think, the most challenging, and that's what I'm grateful for. Yeah.
I am so impressed by your story and how you have been so thoughtful with every single transition, and especially transitioning out of your corporate job and into entrepreneurship. Like giving your supervisor 6 months, like that is so nice of you.
Yeah.
Um, and I think this is a perfect time to ask, what encouragement or advice do you have for the next generation, whether they are looking for jobs or thinking about pursuing higher education or thinking about like, what are the next steps for me in this job?
Yeah. I honestly would say to someone is, you can ask yourself what strategically what would be best for my career, right? Like what positions and roles can I get to benefit me professionally? And that's a great question to have, but I would add that, what do I love to do? I think that, like I said earlier, the question that was fueling me is, well, what is next, right? And there was this big background question of, is what is challenging me? Am I being challenged? But once you add the layer of what do I love, it's really, that's when you can really begin to make decisions professionally that are not just going to be for you, like, is this going to be good for my career? Am I going to get more money? Am I going to get the view? You might get there and realize that that's not where you want to be, and that's okay. That's okay. But even if you are in those moments, add that question, what do I love? Do I love this? Then I think it can really tap into what you've always wanted for you, and tap into the things that at one point maybe you thought about and never came back to because you were so focused on hitting that life marker that is unwritten. And I feel like at some point we realize that there's no deadline. There's no deadline. Yeah, maybe, your parents might, or the people around you might expect you to hit these milestones, right? But the other thing I would say is that it's okay to take your time and to reflect back, especially to moments where you thought about something that interested you and then you never had a chance to think about again because you were so focused on graduating or so focused on making sure you had a job. And those are good things to keep you going, but also what is going to, when you reflect back on the things that you never came back to before, like those are indicators or little things that can point to things that you actually love and passions that you never got to explore. And hopefully you take the time to explore passions that you haven't thought about in a long time, and maybe were things that you had thought about when you were younger. And you never know where it could lead you, where it could take you. And so don't let another pandemic come and like help you, think about. It's like you can intentionally think about things that fueled you at some point when you were younger, and you never know where they might take you. And don't be afraid to explore those possibilities.
So good. I think we're in this time of reflection, especially after the past 3 years of shifting and pivoting. So that I really appreciate that advice. Before we go, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I like to hang out on Instagram at Beabosscoaching. It's all one word, BEABOSS coaching. And you may also come say hello at my website at beabosscoaching.com. Oh, and I'm also on TikTok.
I've been following you everywhere, but I need to connect with you on TikTok because I have been getting more into TikTok. As a millennial, I started TikTok during the pandemic
Yeah.
and have just been, watching,
Yeah.
seeing what's out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like that's where I get a lot of my info and like can really connect with other ideas and other lived experiences and other people's stories. So, yeah, thank you so much. This conversation has been amazing. And I know that we can like probably talk for hours between the two of us. But
Yes.
I appreciate your time and I'm so excited to continue this relationship and hopefully we can continue like collaborating and seeing
Yes.
how we can work together because I think you have an amazing story and can really encourage others through your whole like process.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Karina. I for having me on your podcast, and it was an honor. I had so much fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and we'll talk later.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. What a great conversation to kick off the season. Beatriz gave us so much wisdom about how she navigated her educational journey into her corporate career and what she has learned since transitioning into entrepreneurship. It was so good. Okay, amigos, thank you so much for listening. There'll be a new episode every Tuesday, so after you listen, feel free to take a screenshot, post on Instagram, and tag at Elevating La Cultura, or send me a DM. You can also comment on our YouTube video if you're watching online. I always like to hear from people and how they resonate with the stories that I share. So leave a review on Apple Podcasts so we can get more ears listening to these stories and we can continue elevating La Cultura. And if you haven't already, join the Elevating La Cultura Comunidad on Facebook and check out the website elevatinglacultura.com to see what in-person events I've got going on for you. And you can also see our new merch shop. And next month, I'm reopening the doors to the Showing Up Latina in Business Mentorship Program, designed exclusively for Latina business owners and leaders. Since being a business owner for 13 years now, and with all the millions of pivots I've had to do in the past 6 years, I found so much value in the people who I can bounce ideas off of, vent to, and cheer me on through all the challenges. Many of us are in this time of transition or pivoting and feel like we're on the cusp of something that's about to pop off in our business. If you're a solo entrepreneur, you know the struggle of doing all the things all the time and trying to keep up with all the new trends when it comes to social media. It can be overwhelming, which is getting in the way of faster growth. So if you've been thinking it would be great to have an accountability person or someone to bounce ideas off of and brainstorm next steps, I'm your person. All right, enjoy the rest of your day, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening, y nos vemos next week. Adiós.